Welcome back, everyone, to Season 3 of the Fronczak Files, The Making of Monsters. I'm Tracy Hastings, genetic genealogist, researcher, and your guide through the paper trails and DNA trails that built this case.
And I'm your host, Paul Jack Fronczak. In episode 1, we broke down my entire family tree, the big picture. But today, we zoom in on two people whose choices, struggles, and secrets shaped everything that came after. My paternal grandparents, Harry Rosenthal and Bertha Roco.
This episode is part genealogy, part true crime, and part emotional archaeology. Because the Rosenthal line is full of contradictions, abandonment, resilience, reinvention, and a whole lot of unanswered questions.
So let's dig into the Rosenthal and Roco families, where they came from, how they lived, and what they left behind.
Welcome back to the Fronczak Files. In our last episode, we introduced the complicated world of Jack's biological family, a family shaped by forces we're only beginning to understand. Today, we travel back and take a closer look at Jack's paternal grandparents, Harry Rosenthal and Bertha Roco.
My father's past wasn't just haunted, it was hidden. And to uncover who he really was, we had to dig deep into the Rosenthal and Roco lines. Two very different families, united by love, conflict, and survival.
This is episode 2, The Rosenthal Grandparents, a story of immigration, abandonment, reinvention, and the woman who held this fractured family together.
So Tracy, here we are again, Season 3, Episode 2, The Making of Monsters. So when we talk about making monsters, where do they come from?
I think we've determined that monsters beget monsters, right? That monsters don't just appear, they are created and they're crafted over time and through generations and through experiences and traumas. And this is why we are doing what we're doing this season, taking this really close look at the psychology and the history behind your family and what happened before to bring us to the moment where you were abandoned and Jill disappeared, in order to give us some context about where to look and where to go next.
I agree. And it all comes from parents and their parents and their parents. Usually these kinds of behavior just don't appear out of nowhere. I mean, they do. I mean, there's always that one off. But I think usually we pick up stuff from our parents and they picked up stuff from their parents, good or bad. And I think that's learned behavior, things like that. So when we start this whole making of monsters, we have my mom and dad, Gilbert and Marie, but what came before them? And that would be my grandfather and my grandmother. And what came before them? So I think it's important. Yeah, it's important that we lay that trail down of how things got started.
Because what we discovered when we started to take that journey through your family tree and to climb it was there's a lot of undertow in your family history on both sides. There's a lot of cultural, ethnic, religious implications, things that were happening at the time people were being born and growing up and when they immigrated and where they lived. All of these things shaped the people that created you and shaped the circumstances that you were born into. And I don't think people really appreciate that a lot about their history, how much their history does shape who they are as people. Nature versus nurture, yes. So here we are talking about nature, things that we cannot avoid, those things that are handed down from our ancestors that they give us. And sometimes they give us gifts, and sometimes they give us trauma.
And I've always been a nature guy, not so much nurture.
Absolutely. I mean, you're the living proof of nature versus nurture.
I mean, everything runs deep in the DNA, pre-programmed. A lot of our stuff is just pre-programmed.
Absolutely. You can definitely speak to living in a household where people tried to put you in a box and make you into something that they wanted you to be, what they thought you should be. Why aren't you like us? Why don't you have the same interests as us? Why don't you think the same way we do? And trying very hard to force that into you. And you would not be bent.
I didn't bend the knee. Little nod to Game of Thrones.
And that's also part of your nature makeup. You come from a line of very strong-minded people who believe who believe in what they're doing, whether it's good, bad, or otherwise. And luckily for us, you have that tenacity, but for good, not for
For
evil.
good, not evil. Yeah. And plus, we're talking about the 1800s and 1900s. That's when a big time for change in our country. A lot of things were happening around the world. We had the war coming up shortly, and war just ending. So there's a lot of things going on.
And all of those things were pivotal into the movements that your family made, how they ended up coming from Europe to America, where they settled, the jobs that they took, the places that they lived, the choices that they made in their life. Were all inspired and moved by all of these world events, as well as things happening on their personal level.
Yeah. So I guess the easiest thing to do is to start with my dad.
I think so. If we start with Gilbert and then work our way back.
Yeah. So my dad was born December 16th, 1933 in Philadelphia. His parents were Harry Rosenthal and Bertha Roco, two people from vastly different backgrounds whose lives collided in ways neither one could ever predict.
Yeah,
And,
their
and, and
their
as we go through
backgrounds were
this,
crazy, right? Like so different. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, they say opposites attract, but that's ridiculous.
It really, yeah, definitely that's something I think people buy into. Yeah, if you're different, then you can play off of each other and have different interests and bring different things to the relationship. However, too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. And his parents definitely came from very different places. And so to really understand Gilbert, we really need to understand his parents, right? We need to have a good understanding of who they were and where they came from. And so then I think the next place to jump to is his father, Harry Rosenthal, who in our research and in our digging has been very elusive and very mysterious. He's been a hard man to track.
Yeah. Just to say the least.
And we're not surprised by that, truly. I don't think we are. This is going to be hard to find anything about this man.
Yeah.
Some of the limited things that we know about Harry Rosenthal. There's some discrepancy about where he was born. There's one school of thought that he was born around 1902 in Odessa, which is in the western region of what was Russia at the time, which is now modern Ukraine.
Yeah.
And so there's also a school of thought that he was born in Philadelphia around the turn of the century as well. There is paperwork that census records and things that do say he was born in Philadelphia. So we have not been able to determine which one it is. It's not that it's actually, material to the case per se, but just because we like to get things right, we would really like to be able to establish that. But what we know is that at the time of Harry's birth, if he was born in Western Russia, this would have influenced him, the things that we're going to talk about next. But what we know also is that his father and mother were also born in the Odessa area. So his parents were influenced by the social economic structure of what was happening in Western Russia at the time. And what we know at the turn of the century was the Jews made up a significant portion of the population of this area of Western Russia. And we know that this was a Jewish family, and that Odessa was this huge area for trade at the time. And like 30 to 35% of the Jewish population was dependent on welfare. They lived in this place where there was all of this booming economy happening, that there was this incredible workforce and people were doing well due to the trade industry there. But Jews were being ostracized.
Right?
They were ostracized from the workforce.
Right.
So they were not able to tap into the life-changing job opportunities that were coming into the Odessa area because of their ethnicity and their religious faith. So they were reliant upon welfare. So they're living in an area where there's people that are very affluent, that are living really good lives with good jobs, very stable, yet they're watching this happen while they're getting handouts and scraping by to survive. And on top of that, in 1892, there was a lot of political reform happening in the Odessa area, and there was a rise in anti-Semitism happening at that time as well. And so the city government in Odessa had severely capped the political ability of Jews to be able to vote, to be able to hold office. They were being ostracized as well from the politics of the day also. And what we know is that when this starts to happen, two groups of people, they start to look elsewhere. How do we get out of this situation? There's no opportunities for us here. There's a lot of suppression and discrimination. And how do we go somewhere else and improve our lives?
Yeah, time to go.
Time to go. Harry's mother, Rose, was also born in Odessa, per her Pennsylvania immigration records, and she was born there in 1876. His father, Hyman Rosenthal, was born in Russia, probably close to the Odessa area, in 1871. He arrived in Boston in 1903, and he petitioned for naturalization in 1910 in Pennsylvania.
Good old PA.
So you can see why there's some discrepancy about where Harry might have been born. The family has roots in Russia. The family has roots in Pennsylvania. Hyman immigrated in 1903. Harry was born in around 1902. Was he born here? Was he born there? Was he born here and they went back to Russia and then came back and settled? We're unsure about the back and forth there.
Because we don't have any paper trail on Harry until 1910, the 1910 census for the Society Hill neighborhood of Philadelphia, which sits on the border of South and Central Philly. He was 7 years old. His family was listed as Hyman and Rose. They had 4 children, Anna, Morris, Harry, and baby Sam. Philadelphia then, it was known as the workshop of the world. They had, it was, the auto industry was starting to pick up, and they started having all these trades, these really good trade jobs. The Jews, it seemed like they were more destined to be into the fabrics garment district, but it seems like Hyman and Harry, they ended up working in the auto industry, which was kind of unheard of. They were known as tinners. A tinner was a tinsmith, and they would bang out the metal and, to form the cars. I don't think it's changed a whole lot since then, since, I've seen a lot of cars on the street. But it was different. It was a different time. And somehow they broke into that industry.
And it's so interesting to look at it from that perspective, because you're absolutely right. The traditional trade for Jewish men at this time in this location was the garment industry. That's where everybody went to get a job. You got hired. This was, sweatshop work, 18 hours a day, minimal pay. Women and children were also recruited to work in these places. But Harry and his family decided that wasn't for them, apparently. So they took on a different trade. And they also did it in a really emerging industry. This is the early 1900s. The automobile industry is really starting to emerge. So this is cutting edge. They're definitely breaking molds here, working outside of their culture and breaking into these new innovative industries where typically Jews were not allowed to go. So it begs the question, how did they pull that off?
Definitely a skilled trade.
Absolutely. And what were they bringing to the table that they were able to break out of those social expectations?
Yeah, it's amazing.
And one of the things that's happening as well is Philadelphia at the time, the city of brotherly love, right? This is where America got its start. America was born in Philadelphia. So we get this sort of glossy image, right, of Philadelphia as this place of
I just think of Rocky.
Culture.
Rocky running up the stairs.
I'm sure there was people that also think of that as well. They think of Philadelphia, Liberty Bell, and Rocky, and
M. Night Shyamalan.
All of the above.
Right. I see dead people. Okay.
When we cast the mind back to this time and place, when Harry is growing up in Philadelphia, what we see is that there is, among a population of people that is being discriminated against, which is the Jewish population, there is also a lot of internal turmoil within the Jewish community as well. And at the time, Philadelphia was divided into 2 Jewish communities.
The German Jews?
The German Jews. And what do we know about the German Jews? They were accepted. They'd been assimilated into American life because they had been immigrating from Germany for a long time to the Philadelphia area. So they were well established. They were accepted into that society, and they were considered sort of affluent. And then at around the time that Harry and his family come from Russia to Philadelphia, they're now considered the Eastern European or Russian Jews. And the German Jews don't accept them because they're new, they're unknown, they're strange, they're not part of our community. So but this is on the social level. So socially, the German Jews did not accept the Russian Jews. They did not mix socially. They did not go to the same restaurants, the same clubs. They didn't mingle in the same places. But interestingly, behind the scenes, the German Jews, the more affluent ones, had established charities for their Russian counterparts. So the Jewish community was wanting to take care of their own. They just weren't wanting to do it publicly. And so they were establishing things like the Federation of Jewish Charities, which, though the Russian Jews were socially excluded, these types of charities were supporting them because they were unable to get good paying jobs, stable jobs, because they were being ostracized. So their Jewish counterparts were helping to support them behind the scenes, but not socially accepting them in public. How do you even put that together in your mind? How do you process that as a young boy, your grandfather growing up in this atmosphere of when these German Jews come into our home to visit us, they treat us like friends. But when we pass each other on the street, they don't acknowledge us.
Yeah, that's good. It's got to be so hard. And then, like, he probably doesn't understand. Well, we're all Jews. Why would you persecute us?
Especially when you're young, right? You don't understand the nuances of how this works. So it starts to get swirled around in your head. I don't understand what's happening here. Am I Jewish or am I not? What are we doing? So this can have an undertow on how someone is developing as a person, and their sense of self and their sense of self-worth and value.
Huh. So they were like most of those Jews, and they were living in South Philly, right? That they were forced to live in tenements. They couldn't just go wherever they wanted.
Right. They called it the Jewish Quarter. And so, we've heard about these tenements in Germany, in Poland. These places existed. These places were being created all over the world, and America is no better. These big cities had these same places where Jews were being funneled into, and with strong boundaries that they were afraid to cross, unfortunately. And so, like in South Philadelphia, the borders were South Street and 4th and 5th Streets created sort of this square in South Philadelphia that created the Jewish Quarter.
Like a ghetto.
Yeah, exactly, like a ghetto. And of course, you also have the language issue that's happening as well. So you're trying to function outside of the Jewish Quarter or the ghetto, so you're speaking English. And when you are in the ghetto, you're speaking Yiddish. So what language am I supposed to be speaking? What religion am I? What ethnicity am I? Who am I? And how do I figure out who I am in this climate of getting all of these contradictory signals that I'm getting about who I am?
And how do I survive?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow. So that takes us to where?
Well, it shines a light on the rising anti-Semitism that was happening in Philadelphia, because prior to this, in the early to mid 1800s, Philadelphia was a pretty tolerant city, from what we have been able to find out. It was pretty much a live and let live type of place. But around the turn of the 20th century, there was a big rise in anti-Semitism, and that Jews who had been part of the establishment in Philadelphia for generations, they suddenly found themselves barred from restaurants and social clubs. The society was shifting. The ideals were shifting. So these were people that had once been accepted as part of society, and now they were being ostracized. And it was almost a trickle-down effect, I think, that they were being ostracized from mainstream society, and then they were ostracizing other Jews as well, as a sort of form of where do I put this anger that I have because I'm being ostracized? I'm going to ostracize other Jews. It's just, it goes so deep. And if you don't live that type of existence and you don't have that type of background, it can be hard to understand, hard to put it into context.
And then, so the Jewish Quarter, where they were all kind of funneled into, they were surrounded by Irish, Polish, and Italian neighborhoods. And they couldn't cross those boundaries. They'd get beat up, jumped, robbed, whatever.
Yeah. And so you have to ask yourself, how do you get out of the Jewish Quarter? You have to go through these neighborhoods to leave, to go somewhere else. And so if you're working outside of the Jewish Quarter, how do you get to work without going through all of these other neighborhoods where you stand the possibility of getting beat up, getting robbed, getting killed? This could happen. So
Yeah.
every day you're going out to try to live your life, and you're scared. You're terrified of what might happen to you. And this is the atmosphere that Gilbert's father was being brought up in, and this is shaping him. And what we know now, when we look at child psychology, because of course at the time that was not a thing. But now when we look at child psychology and we look at the effects that anti-Semitism and any form of discrimination has on children growing up, that this is a chronic stressor for children when they grow up in an atmosphere of with something such as anti-Semitism. And it can really disrupt their emotional, social, psychological development. And we can see why. We've discussed all the reasons why this could impact his ability to develop along normal lines. And it's also can be impacted by the idea that adults and institutions who should be protecting you from this type of discrimination aren't protecting you.
Yeah.
Your teachers, your schools, your neighbors, your employers, these people you should feel safe with. You should, your parents, you should feel like you're going to be safe with them. And how are they impacted when they're failed by these people, when they are subjected to discrimination and the people and the institutions that they're depending on to protect them don't? This leads to mental health issues, no doubt.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And then, so Harry's living in this. And then he turned 16 in about 1920. And he's living in North Philadelphia. So he made a switch. He went from South Philly, and now he's in the North. How do you think that happened?
That's a great question, because North Philadelphia was not the place where Jews were. This was a very contained place. So this alone speaks hugely to me about the Rosenthal family. They do have their problems, definitely. However, they're very strong people in this sense, because they broke out of the ghetto and they moved to a place where they weren't supposed to be. And I can only imagine the turmoil that created, and the drama and the trauma that created in their home.
And not only that, but once again, they're breaking the mold in their trade, because the garment industry was still where the Jews worked, and they found themselves working on the railroad. Well, it was Harry, his dad, and his brother Morris all working on the railroad, and that was for the Irish and the Italians. They're the ones that did all the railroad work.
3 Jews working on the railroad. Like, this was unheard of. This was unprecedented.
Yeah.
So they're living in a place where they're not supposed to be. They're working jobs that they're not supposed to be working. They're breaking the mold. And what do we know about breaking the mold? That's never an easy thing to do. And
No.
with it comes a lot of pushback, a lot of
Problems.
a lot of potential problems come with it, socially, physically, economically, mentally, all of the stressors that are coming into this. So you have to sort of have a little bit of respect for the fact that they were not willing to be put in a box, literally, that they were willing to try to break out, to better themselves, and to reach beyond what they were told that they could have. But there's a downside to that as well.
So to me, I'm picturing like scheming, manipulating, bending the rules, right?
You would think so, because this doesn't seem like something that would have just been handed to them because someone was feeling like a nice guy that day.
Yeah.
So whether there was potentially not the full truth was being disclosed, however they decided to try to spin it, to try to take away that big punch in the face of, we're Jews and we're not supposed to be working in the railroad, but here we are. And how did they get around that? How did they manage to get hired to do a job that typically their people were excluded from? It sort of speaks a little bit to the personalities that we're dealing with here.
It's like the more we learn, the more questions are raised.
Exactly. When you've got these 3 men who are an anomaly, really living in a place where they're not supposed to be working jobs they're not supposed to be working. Interesting.
So then after Harry's working on the railroad for a while, in November of 1927, he marries Bertha Roco in Elkton, Maryland, which is about, 50 miles outside of Philly?
Yeah, it's a drivable distance outside of Philadelphia. And we wanted to make that point because when you start talking about these important events happening in different states from where we started. You can think like, wow, they had to go 1,000 miles away in order to get married. It was a pretty short drive from Philadelphia to Elkton, Maryland.
So my grandma, Bertha, she was born November 19th in 1906 in Philadelphia. To Giovanni, we'll call him John, Roco, and Sarah Tukajensky. Giovanni was born into a Roman Catholic family in 1886 in Salerno, Italy. So he was Italian. And Sarah was born into a Polish-Jewish family in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. I wonder how they met.
So there's a good question. How does a Roman Catholic Italian and a Polish Jew come across one another? Because what did we just finish discussing? Yeah. Jewish people were ostracized from the rest of society. And so we've set the groundwork for this. And so you've got this on your other side, as well. On Gilbert's other side is another ethnic issue happening here. How do these two people come together to form a family? And what are the social implications of that? And how did they do that? And boy, was it complicated. We actually were able to find out a lot of information about these two and we don't know how they met, but we do know what followed after the meeting.
I can't wait to hear.
Well, it starts out with Giovanni, or John, as we'll call him, because when he came to America, he did go by John. So John and Sarah were married in 1905 in New Jersey, but they were married without Sarah's parents' consent.
Oh, always a good way to start.
Oh, yeah, that's going to really endear John to the family, isn't it? So they eloped essentially, and so in Sarah's family and in that culture, it's imperative to get the parents' permission first before marrying. The family wants to make sure that their daughter is going to be marrying a man of upstanding citizenship and ability to take care of her and coming from a good family and be able to, this is a Jewish family. So they have a concern that their grandchildren are going to be raised in the Jewish faith and following those family traditions.
And here we have a hardcore Italian guy, a Catholic, straight from Italy.
Couldn't go any different. Talk about taking a hard right turn. Wow. This was about as far outside of the box as Sarah could go.
So what's one thing, or what's two things that an Italian guy can do to prove himself to a Jewish family? Number one, you can denounce your Catholic faith.
And John
Number
did that.
two, what could you really do? Circumcision.
Yes.
John was circumcised, and it was actually in a newspaper article covered that story. He converted to the Jewish faith. He had to marry Sarah a second time, this time by a rabbi in Pennsylvania. Yeah. I can't even, you can't make this up.
No, and you can't make up the fact that his circumcision was an article in the newspaper. What a violation of privacy. This is something we would not even consider putting anywhere in the public domain these days. Oh my God, you'd get sued. But at the time, this was considered real news. And so this adult man subjected himself to circumcision in order to denounce his Roman Catholic faith and to convert to Judaism. So we have to assume that means that the Rocos were no longer part of that family anymore. John was likely ostracized by his own family because he denounced his religion in favor of hers. So somebody was going to lose a family here along the way because of religion.
Yeah, definitely fractured.
For sure. And so that the Roco side of the family likely had very little influence on Bertha and her upbringing, because likely she didn't spend a lot of time with them because of the religious divide.
It keeps getting better and better. So in 1927, Harry and Bertha get married. Now, fast forward to March 29, 2 years later. They're newlyweds. 2 years? You're still newlywed.
It was actually less than 2 years, I think. This was less than 2 years later. So they hadn't been married very long when then we see them resurface again in the newspaper.
Before March 1929, a lot of things were happening in the 20s, right? The Mount Holly newspaper runs a story about the couple.
Again, it's hard to believe that this type of stuff ends up in the newspaper. But the article reports that Harry was attempting to leave Bertha. So they've been married less than 2 years. He's attempting to leave her.
I wonder why.
In retaliation for that, she proceeds to drink poison in front of Harry. And she's
That's
also
a
2
common
months.
response, I'm sure.
Why wouldn't you, right? This is
Yeah.
your go-to thing. I'm going to keep my husband. I'm going to drink poison in front of him. So what do we know? Just we can stop right there. This has been a volatile relationship. No one goes from being happy newlyweds to drinking poison in under 2 years when everything has been fine the whole way through. So we can take from this that this was a not a good relationship from the beginning. And we can take, put into that whatever we would like, their fractured upbringings, their family histories, all of these things colliding in these two people coming together and trying to form a family. And this first several months of marriage was obviously a volatile one because Harry's trying to leave Bertha at this time, and her response is, I'm going to kill myself. You don't just escalate to that from happiness to this. And what is unknown at the time, but what we've been able to discern by putting dates together, is that Bertha was 2 months pregnant with your Uncle Leonard at the time
And drinking poison.
and drinking poison. So she drinks the poison. Harry loads her in the car and drives her to the hospital, tells them what happened. They are able to save her life. When she wakes up, they apparently, Harry and Bertha decide to attempt a reconciliation.
You'd have to, right?
I suppose. Maybe Harry was like, "Whoa, okay, easy. Let's rethink this." And then I think she probably discovered shortly after that she was pregnant. So now he's like going to be locked in for probably longer than he had hoped because now there's a baby involved. So they effect a reconciliation. Bertha recovers and she's discharged from the hospital. When she gets discharged from the hospital, she's arrested for attempting suicide.
Oh, wow.
So, for our listeners today who are thinking, what? You can be arrested for attempting suicide? Yes. At one time in the United States, attempting suicide was illegal. And if you failed, you would be arrested. This was an arrestable offense up until the 1960s and into maybe the early 1970s in some states. And so this is when medical perspectives started to shift regarding the idea of suicide, and that it was now being recognized as a mental health issue versus a moral crime. But at the time that Bertha did this, she was arrested for this. So this is just compounding on top of her trauma. Now she's being arrested.
You just knew it was going to be a tragic story. I mean, because The Making of Monsters is not going to have a happy ending. Yeah. So that brings us to 1940.
So we're fast forwarding 11 years.
Things have really changed. Bertha is now listed as the head of household. Harry's gone. We found a newspaper article dated January 14th, 1940, and the headline was, "Come Back Home, Harry Rosenthal." So Harry left. He left his wife and 2 children, my dad and my dad's brother, my uncle. Just left. I'll give my perspective on that in a little bit. But there's a picture of, we have the article of my grandma, my dad, and my uncle sitting on a porch of the house that they were just evicted from. They couldn't pay their rent. They were living on Aspen Street, and they were starving. My dad was 6, and my uncle was 10. Good Samaritans were leaving food on the doorstep, trying to help the family, giving them food so they don't starve to death. Harry disappears, and there are no records from then on. No confirmed jobs, no addresses, or a death record at this point. Now, Harry did have a barbershop. He also had an illegal card game in the back of that barbershop. I've heard from different people, more than one, that said that he owed the mob about $15,000, and that's why he vanished. Because when you vanish like that, there's a reason behind it.
Yeah, no job trail, no paper trail, no death record anywhere. That certainly raises red flags for sure. And at the time, $15,000 at this time was a lot of money. That was a huge amount of money at this time, and enough to kill somebody for. Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's like I said, you can't make this up. This is This is the making of monsters.
Absolutely. And this was one monster who fell off the radar at this point in the timeline. And your dad being only 6 years old, this is going to have a huge impact on a young boy who sees this volatile relationship between his parents. He sees his father walk away,
being evicted, starving.
His mother is trying desperately to keep the family together and to keep him and his brother alive. So he's seeing this incredibly strong woman coming up against a lot of adversity and picking up the pieces and getting up every day and trying to survive.
And just when you think the story can't get any trickier, in walks Augustino Cipressi.
And who is Augustino?
So Augustino, he was an Italian immigrant who arrived in the U.S. in 1923. He was I would say kind of an entrepreneur. He was a laborer, a sandwich maker, a drink maker, a taffy maker, candy maker. He was doing everything he could to make a buck. He applied for citizenship in 1935. But before that, he was my grandma, Bertha, Augie, we'll call him Augie. He was living in my grandma's house as a tenant, paying her rent. Next thing you know, they're getting married. Harry's gone. We know he's gone. Bertha ends up marrying Augustino Cipressi. And when he applied for citizenship in 1935 in Philadelphia, one of the sworn witnesses was Harry Rosenthal, which doesn't make any sense at all.
It's definitely an interesting triangle, no doubt. Absolutely interesting that that these three people would intersect on more than one occasion, and ultimately then end up Bertha and Augie are getting married. Interesting.
And I've heard great stories from my family about what a nice guy Augie was. Just a really nice, quiet guy, made amazing taffy.
Yeah, it sounds like he brought a little bit of stability to a world of crazy. It sounded like he was sort of a stabilizing factor potentially for Bertha and the boys.
But for Harry, my grandpa, to be his sworn witness, and then Harry goes missing, and all of a sudden Augie's marrying his wife.
And then he's sliding into home plate there with Bertha.
Wow.
It just creates all kinds of questions, which we probably won't ever find the answers to. But
never say never.
It does create a lot of scenarios in your mind about what was actually going on.
It really does. Wow. So by the mid-1940s, Bertha and Augie are living in Atlantic City. She's working as a cook. Then later she managed a hotel. She was always doing something. I talked to my family that remember her, they got to spend time with her, and she was always starting a business. She was very, very business-minded and entrepreneur, 100%. Augie was working wherever he could. He would just filling things, doing things, making candy, whatever. And this is all the while they're raising Leonard and my dad, Gilbert. So I can only imagine the upbringing that my dad and his brother had.
Boy, well, it was fractured, no doubt. There was not a lot of stability there. There was not a lot of time to be a kid. It doesn't sound like that as young children, Leonard and Gilbert were dealing with adult problems at young ages. And we know that has a negative psychological impact on children when they are forced to grow up too quickly, and when they're dealing with adult level problems with a child's level of development.
So I'm fortunate enough, I got to spend time with my cousin Lenny Roco, and him and my dad were buddies. They would hang out, and he told me some really good stories before he passed away, how they would buy a bunch of eggs from some shady people, and then they would go out in the the different areas, neighborhoods, and sell these eggs. And the eggs, a lot of them were rotten, but they would sell them right before they turned, try to get all that money. And one time they had a problem. Someone busted them for selling rotten eggs, and these people wanted to beat them up. And my cousin said that my dad, he wasn't a fighter. He was a very smart man, and he would talk his way out of anything. And that's basically what Lenny said, that my dad could talk to anybody and get out of any trouble that he was in. And so they ended up not getting beat up that day. And that story just stuck with me because here they are, just young kids trying to make a buck. Where, I look at my daughter when she was that age, she wasn't doing something like that. She's, playing video games or whatever, and here they're selling eggs, hustling eggs on the street.
A totally different time and place, totally different contextual um, place and time for what children would be doing. This is why it's important to go over the history here, because people today can't relate to any of this. This seems very foreign to them. What? 12-year-old kids out in the streets selling eggs? What is happening here? This was real. This was happening in our country at that time. This was the norm at the time. So it, so for our listeners and our viewers who are thinking this is sort of a walk backwards and I'm not sure what's going on here, it's important for you to understand where these people came from and what was considered the norm socially at the time. And all of this was considered normal, unfortunately, for the time and place that he was being brought up in. And then it brings us to the point of this episode, which is, how does this historical background affect Gilbert, and what does it mean for him in his development as a human being, as he is coming through childhood, through adolescence, and into getting married and having a family? How does all of this affect him? He has a father who disappeared. What message does that send to him as a young boy? I suppose if when things get difficult, you can walk away. That's what my dad did. So, and that seemed okay. That's what happened. And I guess that's what we do. He also saw a very strong mother. Bertha Roco was an incredibly strong woman, no doubt had her own issues, I'm sure. But she was very strong and a survivor. And my own personal take on this is that Gilbert saw this growing up. He saw a woman who was able to persevere through a lot of trauma and a lot of devastating circumstances that would probably break a lesser person. And this is his way that he's viewed women, right? He would grow up viewing women as strong and able to solve problems and to be able to handle anything. And he's growing up with a mother who is he's seeing this person who is protecting him, taking care of him, trying to make the best for him, and problem solving her way through some really awful stuff.
I've got a good Bertha story for you. I heard this from some of my cousins that were actually there when this happened. They called Bertha 4x4 because she was 4 feet tall and 4 feet wide. And they said that they were all hungry. They were outside. And Bertha had made this really big sub sandwich, sandwich, probably with
Sure.
peppers and, gabagool. I don't know.
A sandwich, right?
Yeah. And so all the kids thought that she was making it for all of them to share because they were hungry. They said that she made that sandwich. She stood right in front of them and she ate the whole thing, turned around and walked back in the house. And they said that was Bertha. That's a memory.
She's a powerful woman, no doubt. Yeah. I'm sure with her own issues, but a powerful woman. And this could have potentially shaped Gilbert's view of women. I mean, this is how men develop their first ideas of what women should be and how women should act is their mothers. This is the first relationship you have with a woman is with your mother.
Hopefully.
And theoretically.
Yeah.
Is it really your mother? As we know. Most of the time, we're going to say, because we know that the rules don't apply to your case whatsoever.
Okay.
So when you take that forward, when you take all of these things forward, of growing up in a home shaped by poverty and instability, disorganization and dysfunctional cultural backgrounds, abandonment issues, it all sets this generational tone that is going to be handed down. We talk about the gifts we receive from our ancestors. Some of them aren't always gifts. And some of them are burdens. And this sounds like a heavy set of burden that was being passed down generationally. And my own take on this is that it's possible that Gilbert viewed Marie as weak because she wasn't like Bertha. Bertha was able to problem solve through some really difficult things. Bertha took charge and she made things happen. And when Gilbert potentially was in a place where he was feeling overwhelmed and not wanting to be in a home full of children, he's dealing with Marie's gambling issues and drinking problems, and he's just had enough. His idea is to walk away and leave it to the woman to take care of the problem, because this is how he was brought up. This is what he saw happen. Harry left when it was a problem, and Bertha took care of the rest. And it's my own personal take on it, looking at the psychology of it and the makeup of the family, that he might have had the same expectations of your mother. And your mother was not Bertha Roco. Your mother was a much more fragile, fractured, damaged person, and unable to reach those, to attain that expectation that he might have had of her.
Yeah, it's like a Shakespearean tragedy, this whole family.
And we hope that this walk through the historical background of the family and what helped shape them is going to help our listeners and our viewers to really be able to understand, as we move through the season, the why we're doing it.
And it also reinforces to me of why it's so good to know where we come from, to know our identities, to know why we are the way we are, and to be able to break that cycle. They always say the sins of the father, you know, don't repeat that. And, you want to change, you want to be the best that you can be. And it really helps when you understand and see how things started and how I ended up on the street. Because once again, it goes back to the making of monsters, the environment, the choices they made, what they endured, and how they handled it.
Exactly. And as you and I had discussed, as we were developing this season, just as a little glance behind the scenes for everyone, there's a lot of time spent putting this together and developing what is the season going to look like and what are our goals that we want to achieve in this season. And you and I had some conversations about comments that we'd received during season 1 from people who were telling us that they felt like we were being a little too hard on the players in your story, that we were being a little harsh and we weren't being very understanding of the forces that were maybe pulling on the people involved in this scenario, your mother, your father, etc. And this is why we felt it was important that we take this journey through your history so that people can understand your perspective. Are you being harsh on Marie Duncan and Gilbert Rosenthal? Absolutely, you are. Let's help them understand why.
Yeah. And luckily, my family had a lot of bad stuff happening, so they were in the papers quite a bit. So it's really easy it helps to build a timeline and to build the history of your family when it's been in the newspapers, poisonings and going to jail and, all kinds of stuff that they went through. It makes it thankfully things were well documented.
Yeah, I mean, we can't imagine that now, but for what we're trying to accomplish, it's been invaluable. And inside these are family stories. These are things now that is our family lore that most families talk about, behind the scenes over Thanksgiving dinner. Remember that time when so-and-so? These are the things that we were missing from your timeline, were these personal stories that were being covered in the newspaper. Thank goodness that they were.
Yeah, thank God for that.
Yeah, it's really helped fill in a lot of blanks for us.
So, Tracy, what have we learned today?
Well, we learned that people come from their history. People are created by the events and the people and the places that they experience, good, bad, or otherwise. And that we all are products of our history. And we have a choice to make about how we move forward with our history and the history that we're given.
It's all about choices, things that you go through, and what makes this person starts with the person before them and what they've seen, what they've heard, what they learned from that behavior, and then the choices that they make using those tools.
And you're the primary example of that as well. And I think you've realized that as you moved through this, that you have a history that you came into, and you spent the first couple of years of your life immersed in that history. However, you've been able to rise above it and make different choices in your life, and to be aware of that, it had to have been very validating for you when you discovered, wow, these people are really messed up. This place I came from was really dysfunctional, and look at where I ended up.
Yeah. Well, I made a promise to my daughter when she was first born that I wanted to find the truth. And by doing that, it's allowed me to be a better dad, a better friend, I think just a better guy in general. It's one thing to let the past control you, but once you learn the past, I think it's easier to change your future.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And to be wise enough to be able to learn from it.
No DeLorean needed.
Although that'd be cool.
It would be cool,
But
yeah.
that'd be fun. We'll see if our younger viewers, listeners get that reference.
Yeah, probably not.
We spend a lot of time explaining things on the podcast because of that reason, because we do have younger listeners who don't remember the times and places that we're talking about. So,
well, thank God for Google.
Right? Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
right.
Next week,
what's going to happen next week?
We take it down even further. We take it more down to the microscopic level, and we're going to be focusing on Gilbert Rosenthal for episode 3. We're going to dig into him and the details of his life and the events and circumstances that led up to July of 1965.
So buckle up, because we're not holding back.
The story of the Rosenthal and Roco families isn't just genealogy. It's the origin story of the trauma and instability that Jack inherited long before he was born.
And it's also the story of strength. My grandmother Bertha held that family together through abandonment, poverty, and public humiliation. Without her, I might not be here to tell any of this.
Next week, in episode 3, we're taking you even deeper into the Rosenthal family culture itself. We'll explore the people, places, and patterns that shaped Jack's father, Gilbert Rosenthal, and how those forces played a role in the disappearance of Jack and Jill.
So thanks for joining us, and stick with us. This family history sets the stage for everything that happened next. And don't forget to bring your shovels.